Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching. Explosions lit up the void. Council warships buckled under the SAR assault, one after another torn apart, their hulls breaking in silence. Debris spun across the battlefield, engines burning, shattered decks drifting through the dark. On the bridge of the Council's flagship Tirashal, alarms screamed in dozens of tones. Officers of every species barked into comms, their voices overlapping, clipped with panic. A scale-skinned Luthari officer snapped, "Sector 9 collapsing! They've breached the outer screen!" His gill-like frills pulsed, betraying stress. Another, a lean Finari with bright emerald eyes, shouted, "Reinforcements can't hold! We're losing command over the flank!" Holograms flared across the command table, red markers blinking faster with each passing second. Transmission after transmission came through, fragmented voices, desperate calls for help, reports that ended mid-sentence as another ship was torn apart. "Pull them back," someone ordered. "There's no back left," another replied, his mandibles twitching with rage and fear. Amid the chaos, a smaller formation of ships flickered into the fray. Human vessels, stripped down and practical, operating on the far edges of the battle. They weren't center stage. They never were. From the viewport of one escort ship, Captain Mark Stevens tightened his grip on the chair's arms. His crew's chatter was quick, direct, their faces illuminated by red warning lights. "Captain, they're cutting right through us." "I see it. Stay on task. Keep the corridor open," Stevens said, his tone steady even as the hull rattled under the impact of a glancing strike. His first officer, a young woman named Rachel Kim, swallowed hard and nodded. "They know we're a distraction," she muttered, almost to herself. Stevens glanced at her but said nothing. Orders were orders. His hand brushed the console, sending their ship diving into the path of another barrage meant for the Council flagship. Sparks showered across the bridge. Nobody questioned why they were out there. They simply acted. Far away, in the Council's grand chamber, a different kind of battle unfolded. Rows of alien dignitaries filled the crescent-shaped hall, their voices low as images of the failing battle streamed across towering displays. The room smelled faintly of incense from Irathi delegations, mixed with the metallic tang of recycled air. At the central podium, High Counselor Syraxis leaned forward, his carapace gleaming under the light. His voice oozed disdain. "The enemy presses harder, yes, but our measures remain appropriate." Chancellor Wyatt Kaluuya stood among them, tall, wearing the sharp suit of Earth's delegation. His jaw was clenched, but his voice was measured. "Appropriate? I see fleets breaking apart. I see lines collapsing. What I don't see is a plan that saves lives." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Counselors exchanged glances, some rolling their eyes, others smirking. A violet-skinned Tharkan waved a hand dismissively. "Your people are positioned. That is their role." Wyatt's gaze cut through him like steel. "Their role," he repeated evenly, "is not to die pointlessly. I asked for clear reports, not evasions." Another counselor, plump and feathered, preened his wings with a sneer. "The Council acts with centuries of wisdom, Chancellor. Earth would do well to remember its place." Wyatt didn't flinch. Wisdom doesn't look like ships breaking apart while civilians sit undefended. His tone was calm, almost quiet, but every word struck sharper than the last. The chamber stirred uncomfortably. Syraxis raised his voice again, dripping with superiority. "This is not the moment for accusations. Strategy requires sacrifice. You speak of civilians as though they determine wars. They do not." The screens above shifted suddenly. Data feed stabilized long enough to confirm what Wyatt feared. An entire front was gone. Red lines vanished from the maps, replaced with empty void. Dozens of colonies now lay vulnerable, entire sectors exposed like an open wound. For the first time, some counselors' smugness faltered. A hush swept the chamber, but no one admitted failure. One muttered, "A temporary setback." Another said, "It creates opportunity for a trap." None of them addressed the fact that millions of lives were now at risk. Wyatt stepped closer to the central display. His eyes scanned the star map. the faint dots representing colonies. His gut twisted as he recognized names. Settlements where human families had built homes, where markets bustled with alien and human children playing together. Now those dots blinked red. He drew a slow breath, masking the storm building inside him. He didn't raise his voice. The silence did the work. You've left civilians on the line, human civilians, allied civilians. No one answered him directly. A few counselors exchanged smirks, as if his insistence was a minor annoyance. Wyatt stood straighter, refusing to back down. This is not strategy. This is abandonment. Syraxis flicked his mandibles, clearly irritated. Chancellor Kaluuya, remain within your capacity. The council decides. Wyatt's expression remained unreadable, but his fingers brushed the communicator at his wrist. While the chamber bickered on, he lowered his voice and connected to a secure channel. Donald, he said, deliberately using the first name. Static crackled, then Admiral Donald Wayne's deep voice answered. Wyatt, I've been watching. We've lost contact with several colonies already. I don't like what that means. Wyatt's gaze stayed fixed on the blinking dots. Confirm it for me. A pause stretched, filled only with the faint buzz of the comm. Then Wayne replied, his tone grim. They're exposed, Wyatt. All of them. And we're too far behind the curve. Wyatt's hand curled into a fist at his side. Around him, counselors droned on with arrogance, unwilling to admit disaster. But in Wyatt's ear, in that private channel, came the only truth that mattered. Then we're already out of time, Wyatt murmured. His eyes stayed locked on the map, unblinking. And though he stood in the chamber of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, at that moment, Wyatt knew the fate of the colonies, and of humanity itself, was slipping towards something far worse than the Council dared to acknowledge. Wyatt's voice still echoed in his ear as Admiral Donald Wayne paced across the command deck of the Sabbath. His crew stood tense, eyes locked on their stations. He had just received the Chancellor's encrypted transmission, and every officer understood the weight that followed. They've gone dark, Wayne finally said, his voice heavy. His face stayed hard in the cold blue of the tactical display. The colonies aren't responding, not one. Lieutenant Rachel Kim, standing at his side, adjusted the feed on her console. The maps flickered, countless icons grayed out. We're pushing scans, Admiral, but the systems are jammed. We can't see past the blockade. Wayne stopped, gripping the rail at the edge of the deck. His eyes burned on the red markers spreading across the sector like an infection. He exhaled slowly. Then we assume the worst. He raised the communicator and spoke directly to Wyatt, keeping his tone level. Wyatt, I'm confirming it. We've lost contact with the colonies. We're still probing, but nothing's coming through. If the Empire's there, the civilians are already in danger. On the other end of the line, the Chancellor's voice was steady but clipped. Understood. Keep pushing for whatever you can. I'll handle the Council. Wayne's voice came back across the secure channel, steady but edged with impatience. Wyatt, why waste time waiting on them? We both know what has to be done. Wyatt's reply was calm, but it carried the weight of calculation. Because too many treaties are still in motion, Donald. They've opened doors for Earth, trade, recognition, allies who still listen to the Council. Starting a war with them now serves no one. That's the only reason this theater continues. Wayne grunted, the sound heavy with frustration. Politics. Exactly, Wyatt said, his eyes fixed on the blinking red colonies across the display. For now. Back in the chamber, the storm was already building. The massive screens above the Council flickered with live feeds, Council fleets retreating in broken formations, battle groups falling apart. Where there had been order, now there was chaos. Alien ships lit up the void, burning trails as they scattered. One projection zoomed into the sector of the colonies. A swarm of Xar Empire vessels streaked into system after system, their frames jagged and uneven, like shards of crystal forced into the shape of warships. Pale streaks of violet energy pulsed along their hulls in irregular patterns, making them look less like machines of design and more like something fractured yet dangerous. They didn't fire yet, but their presence alone was conquest. Wyatt's voice broke through the council's chorus of mutters. "You see it as well as I do. The Empire's already moving in. They'll be in the colonies within hours." High Counselor Syraxis rose to his full height, towering on jointed legs, his crystalline carapace shimmering faintly. His mandibles clicked as he gave a sharp laugh. "Our maneuver was intentional. We draw them in. They believe us weak. Then we strike." A counselor with pale, feathered skin leaned back in his seat, beak curling in disdain. "Exactly. A tactical withdrawal, Chancellor. You should learn from those who have centuries of experience." Wyatt's eyes narrowed. "That isn't a tactic. That's a route." The chamber bristled. Another counselor, slim and eel-like, waved a hand, his voice hissing. "Humans see chaos where there is strategy. You lack the patience to appreciate the trap." Wyatt didn't look away. His tone cut through the chamber. "Patience doesn't save families when soldiers abandon them." Some counselors shifted, annoyed at his persistence. Syraxis raised a hand, silencing them with an air of superiority. "Your concern for civilians is quaint, but strategy decides wars, not their tears. That is why we, not Earth, lead the council." Wyatt's jaw flexed, but his voice remained calm, each word sharp as a blade. "And who leads when the colonies are overrun?" The chamber stirred again, the counselors exchanging sidelong glances. None answered. They didn't need to. The images on the screens told the story better than they ever would. Finally, Syraxis leaned forward, his mandibles spreading in what passed for a smile. "Perhaps, Chancellor, this is where your people can serve the greater plan. Yes, send your soldiers. Let them occupy the exposed sector. Hold the enemy's gaze while we ready the strike." The word lingered in the chamber like a knife. Occupy. As if human soldiers were nothing more than pieces to be placed on a board. Wyatt inhaled slowly, forcing down the fire burning in his chest. His tone, when he spoke, was smooth, almost agreeable, but the edge was unmistakable. "Of course. You can always count on us. We'll send soldiers." A ripple of smug satisfaction passed among the counselors. The feathered one gave a sharp laugh. "Good. At last the humans understand their role." Another muttered. "They're useful when pointed in the right direction." Wyatt gave a short nod, his expression controlled, almost deferential. Then it settled. His words carried a strange cadence, obedience on the surface, but layered with something else entirely. The counselors saw compliance. What they didn't see was the calculation behind his eyes. Wyatt turned his gaze back to the screens one last time. Colonies blinked red across the map, whole worlds teetering on the edge of annihilation. Inside, he was already forming the next step. He let none of it show, only the faintest flicker of a smile that could have been mistaken for resignation. But the truth was clear to him alone. The council thought they had won the argument. Wyatt knew they had just handed him the only opening he needed. Wyatt Kaluuya stepped out of the council chamber with the echo of smug alien voices still clinging to him. The polished marble of the hall reflected the faint glow of the star map he had just watched collapse into chaos. He moved quickly, his stride sharp and deliberate, ignoring the sideways glances of attendants who pretended not to notice the storm simmering behind his eyes. As soon as the chamber doors sealed behind him, Wyatt tapped his wrist communicator. The line clicked alive, secure encryption humming. "Donald," he said. His voice was low, hard, but steady. Admiral Donald Wayne's image flickered onto the small display as Wyatt entered the docking bay where his transport waited. Wayne's face was lit by the cold glow of tactical projections. The man didn't waste time on greetings. "You saw the feed?" Wyatt nodded. "The colonies are being swallowed whole, and the council asked me to send soldiers to occupy the sector, like we're janitors cleaning up their mess." His tone sharpened with mocking emphasis on the word. Wayne's lip curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Then they're about to get exactly what they asked for." Wyatt arched a brow as he stepped onto his ship, lowering his voice. "I had the same thought. But tell me, Donald, are they ready?" Wayne's reply was firm, leaving no room for hesitation. "They were built for this. If anyone is ready, it's them. We'll find out soon enough. Wyatt let the faintest trace of approval pass across his face. Then do it. Send them. Wayne didn't need convincing. He turned from the communicator, barking quiet orders to aides outside the screen's view. The Admiral's voice was steady, almost ritualistic as he said, "Bring them up. It's time." The call ended. Wyatt leaned back into his seat, the hum of his transport systems filling the cabin. Beyond the bay doors, the stars waited, distant and cold. He could already feel the shift coming, the point where words gave way to action. Now he only had to wait for the outcome. Far across space, in a fortress hidden from every known trade lane, klaxons pulsed with a steady rhythm. Inside, cavernous hangars came alive with movement. 40,000 humans, armored giants in the making, began their preparations. Rows of lockers hissed open, revealing towering exosuits forged of steel and composite plating. Marines stepped into their gear with practiced precision, each movement honed by years of training. Hydraulic seals locked into place as armor plates folded over broad shoulders and powerful frames. There were no speeches, no drawn-out ceremonies. Just the quiet thunder of boots on metal, the crack of armor sealing shut, and the weight of history pressing in on every man who moved through that hangar. Above the din, a voice, not from a throat, but from the walls themselves, rolled across the base, deep and resonant. "No one falls in battle." The words didn't sound like a rule. They sounded like an oath carried through generations, the promise every Warhammer carried etched into their bones. The phrase rippled through the hangar like a pulse. Marines paused for just a second, tightening their grips on their helmets, then continued forward with a determination that made the air itself feel heavier. Massive platforms rumbled as warships emerged from their docks. The vessels dwarfed the hangars that had hidden them, rising into space with the slow inevitability of mountains shifting. Each ship's hull gleamed with the harsh light of stars, their designs simple yet brutal in intent. These were not ships meant to impress diplomats. They were weapons built to deliver soldiers and bring them home alive. On the command deck, Wayne stood with his officers, watching the first of the colossal ships clear the docking arms. At his side, Lieutenant Rachel Kim's eyes widened as the scale of the mobilization revealed itself. It's been years since they were put in place. To see all of them moving at once. Wayne's reply was quiet, but it cut through the rumble of engines. They were always meant for one purpose, and now they'll have the chance to serve it. One by one, warships slid into formation, their thrusters glowing as they spread across the void. Smaller escort vessels aligned beside them, each filled to the brim with men who had lived their entire lives for this hour. In the barracks, deep inside the lead ship, squads of Marines strapped on weapons and checked armor seals, their focus so intense it weighed heavier than any words. One young Marine, his face still marked with training scars, murmured to his squad mate, "Feels like we've been waiting our whole lives for this." The other answered simply, "We have." Engines roared as power surged through the fleet. The vibrations carried into the bones of every man on board. Then, in perfect unison, dozens of massive vessels pivoted, their prows cutting toward the coordinates of the colonies. Donald Wayne watched from the command deck, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. For a moment, the sight was almost overwhelming, the sheer scale of humanity's answer, rising like a tidal wave across the stars. He nodded once to Boone. "Set the jump. All of them." In the silence that followed, the fleet prepared. The stars seemed to hold their breath as arcs of energy crawled across the hulls. Then, with a single collective surge, the Warhammer fleet vanished into the void, leaving nothing but the echo of their engines behind. And with them, the war itself shifted course. The Warhammer fleet tore out of the jump into the colony sector, their hulls catching the glow of nearby suns as if the stars themselves had chosen to arm humanity. The formation didn't hesitate. Within seconds, massive warships split across vectors, peeling off into dozens of strike paths. Each one carried thousands of Marines, and each one carved a line straight toward a threatened colony. "Divide and hit all targets," came the clipped voice across encrypted channels. Warships surged forward. Smaller escort vessels darted between them, weaving like hunting wolves through the far larger swarm of Xar ships. In the darkness ahead, the Empire's fleet shifted to meet them. The alien vessels, angular and jagged like fractured crystal, pulsed faintly with violet currents as if alive with tension. They adjusted their formations quickly, stretching their net to try to encircle the humans. The first salvos lit the void, lines of fire stitching across the dark. Warhammer's ships didn't wait for clean angles. They punched forward, every burst carving space through the jagged wall of Khazar vessels. Hammer X9's voice cut in, raw and tense. "They're trying to cage us," Hammer C5 answered without hesitation. "Then we smash the cage, straight through." Two human vessels dove into the tightening gap. Their cannons roared in unison, carving twin scars of light across a Sar cruiser's fractured hull. The alien ship cracked apart, shards spinning away like broken crystal flung into the dark. To the left flank, chaos thickened. Hammer V2 came through, his tone clipped but strained. "3 on me! They're sticking hard!" Hammer L7 shot back, almost eager. "I've got them!" Two strike craft swooped down, engines flaring as they crossed each other's fire. Their blasts ripped through the pursuers, splitting the enemy ships in half, violet currents flashing wild before collapsing to silence. The battlefield churned with violence. Smaller human ships knifed between Khazar leviathans, too fast to pin down, striking exposed joints and pulling away before the enemy could counter. Warhammer warships advanced like sledgehammers, their hulls shrugging off glancing blows as they rammed deeper into enemy lines. The Xar tried to close ranks, violet energy pulsing as their formations bent inward. But every time they shifted, another cluster of human ships punched a hole straight through, leaving wreckage in their wake. And with each blast, each brutal push, the path widened. A corridor of fire and wreckage torn open by sheer will, leading straight to the colonies. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't balanced, it was relentless. From the bellies of the great warships, the first wave of descent pods blasted free. Dozens at once, then hundreds, streaking down toward the surface of the colonies like burning comets. Trails of fire cut across the skies of multiple worlds as the Marines made their way in. Inside the pods, the Marines braced. The walls rattled, the gravity shifted. One muttered under his breath, "Feels like hell's waiting down there." Hammer J3 replied, "Steady. Then let's show them what hell really looks like." The pods slammed into colony ground with thunderous impact. Hatches exploded outward. An armored giant stormed onto the soil. The Xar were there waiting. Towering brutes with broad shoulders and thick arms, their scaled hides glittering under the colony suns. Their snarling faces twisted with surprise at the humans who emerged in armor that turned them into living walls of steel. The first clash was brutal. A Warhammer's rifle sputtered as its targeting sensor glitched. He didn't hesitate. He ripped the weapon free, drew his blade, and cut down the charging alien in one clean strike. Another Marine's armor joint sparked as a plasma bolt seared through, but he pressed forward anyway, smashing his shield into a Xar and driving him back through a wall. Every malfunction became fuel for ingenuity. Equipment bent, armor cracked, but no one slowed. The oath rang in their bones. No one falls in battle. The Xar faltered. These were conquerors used to towering over smaller prey, but here they met men who advanced no matter the wound, who fought with a fire that machines couldn't extinguish. Intimidation had always been the Empire's first weapon, but it shattered in the face of this unyielding human advance. A Warhammer squad moved through the streets of one colony's capital. Buildings burned, civilians huddled in corners, alien families pressed together as if waiting for execution. For a heartbeat they froze, wide-eyed at the armored giants storming in. Then relief broke through the fear. Cries of children turned into gasps of hope, hands reaching toward the Marines as if salvation had just walked out of fire. Hammer D4 said with iron in his tone, "Protect the civilians. Everything else burns later." The squad split instantly. Two Marines shielded groups of frightened children while others drove the Xar back with precise bursts. Hammer K6's voice cut through. "Civilians are safe. Getting them underground. Keep the bastards off us." At another colony, pods crashed straight into the heart of an industrial district. Marines stormed factories turned into enemy strongholds. Hammer T1 growled into the comm. "Block by block. Push them out." The Marines' closed channel hummed with clipped exchanges, each one layered with the weight of their mission. Sector clear. 2 down. Civilians freed. Enemy pushing east. Need pressure west. On it. No one left behind. Every report wasn't about kills or ships destroyed. It was about lives saved, ground taken back, and civilians pulled from death's grip. Hours stretched into a single relentless push. The Tsar Empire's confidence eroded with every clash. Where they once charged, now they hesitated. Where they once sneered, now they snarled in frustration. By nightfall on the first colony, the Warhammers had secured entire districts. Fires still burned, but civilians were alive, and the streets once crawling with Tsar were littered instead with their fallen. On an open channel, Hammer C5's voice reported with finality, Colony 1, secured. The Marines reformed, towering figures in battered armor, their presence alone enough to keep the enemy from daring another advance. The oath had been tested, and not a single Warhammer had been left behind. The tide, for the first time, had turned. But above those worlds, the fight for survival grew fiercer by the second. Warhammer warships locked into defensive lines, their colossal frames holding orbit and shielding the Marines already fighting below. Violet streaks from the Empire's weapons lanced through space, desperate to burn a path to the surface. Every human ship that moved into their way did so with one purpose: keep the skies closed to the enemy. Admiral Donald Wayne stood at the heart of the Sabbath's command deck, his hands gripping the rail as tactical feeds flickered across the room. The faces of his officers were hard, bathed in the harsh glow of battle. "No one breaks atmosphere," Wayne ordered, voice calm but commanding. "If they reach the ground, we lose everything we've bought." An alien Leviathan, vast, jagged like a mountain of fractured crystal, peeled away from the main line and drove toward one of the colonies. Its engines spat violet flares as its weapons carved through the void. Wayne didn't move, but the tension in his face said enough. "Cut it off." 2 Warhammer assault ships shifted course, streaking across the Leviathan's path. Their cannons spat relentless fire, hammering at the brute's flanks. The alien vessel turned its massive guns and unleashed a flood of energy. One human ship was ripped open in an instant, fire and steel scattering across the stars. The second never slowed. It smashed into the Leviathan's hull, detonating its payloads point blank. The impact tore the alien giant apart in a thunderous chain of explosions, fragments tumbling like broken shards of glass across orbit. The comms crackled alive with harsh, clipped voices. "Hammer A7, too many coming my way. Hammer K2 here, hold on, I'm cutting them off." Engines blazed as Hammer K2's strike vessel tore across the gap, blasting apart a cruiser with a barrage that shredded its fractured armor. A7's voice returned a moment later, strained but resolute. "Sector clear. East vector holds." But the Empire pressed harder. Dozens of their jagged ships folded inward, weaving into a crushing wall that closed around the center of the human formation. From the Sabbath's command deck, the view was grim, a noose tightening. Lieutenant Rachel Kim leaned over her console, voice quick and sharp. "Admiral, they're closing the trap. Fast." Wayne's eyes locked on the display, his tone edged with iron. "Hammers. Looks like we've got some nails east of Caradon Colony. Break them open." The order surged through the fleet. Warhammer warships advanced in brutal unison, their prows blazing as they smashed into the heart of the alien formation. Guns roared, cannons spat streams of fire, and armored hulls shrugged off glancing blows as the humans forced their way through. Smaller escorts darted ahead, stabbing at exposed joints before breaking away, opening the path wider. The Empire's ships fired back with everything they had. A hammering storm of violet energy cascaded against human hulls. One Warhammer battleship's shields buckled, then failed, its plating cracked under the assault. Hammer T9's voice cut through the comms, strained but steady. "Main cannons fried. I can't fire anymore. But I can draw their eyes." Before the weight of those words could sink in, another voice cut in, sharp and certain. "Hammer G4. Good. Pull them west, toward the wreckage field. I'll finish it." The crippled ship didn't pause. Engines flared as it surged forward, driving straight into a dreadship twice its size. The collision shattered both, a flash of white consuming them, as the debris scattered into orbit. The gap left behind opened the corridor wider for the fleet to press through. The battle spread across the colonies. Above one world, a group of Kassar ships broke free, angling toward the atmosphere. Hammer S3 cut across the comms, urgency in his tone. "They're diving. I can't stop them alone." Hammer D6 replied without hesitation, voice hard as steel. "You're not alone." Two Warhammer strike vessels swooped in from opposite sides, slamming their fire into the enemy formation. Explosions bloomed, tearing one alien ship apart. Another tried to slip through, but S3's battered vessel caught it broadside, driving it back into the line of D6's guns. The alien ship fractured, its burning wreckage falling harmlessly into the void. "No SAR on this sky, not anymore," S3 muttered over the line. "Then keep him clear," D6 shot back. All across the sector, the same rhythm repeated. Human ships threw themselves into the path of the enemy, each clash, another desperate push, each victory another colony shielded. Slowly, inevitably, the tide began to turn. On the Sabbath's deck, Wayne's officers tracked the growing signs of victory. Enemy formations broke apart, splintered ships drifted powerless, and for the first time since the war had begun, the humans pushed the Kassar Empire back system by system. Reports filled the channels, short and sharp. First colony, Caradon, secured. Civilians safe. Colony stands with us again. Second, Damaris, clear. No breaches to the surface. Third, Chiron back under our control. Fourth, Valor, safe. Civilians accounted for. The voices of the Warhammer leaders carried a weight beyond the words themselves. Men who had been built for this moment, their clipped confirmations filled with satisfaction that no council report could ever capture. Other leaders followed, their voices like rolling thunder through the comms. Fifth colony, Arian, ours again. 6, Talrus, clear. 7, Zadar, retaken. Streets clear. The feed settled into a rhythm of victory. One report after another, each one slamming down like a hammer stroke until there was nothing left to confirm. Wayne stood at the center of it all, the weight of every loss and every victory pressing on him. Around him, the deck was filled with officers frozen at attention, waiting for his word. He stared at the tactical map where the remnants of the Empire's fleet drifted like wreckage in a storm. The lines that once blinked red across the colonies now shone steady again. He drew a breath, steadying his voice, then spoke. "Good. The colonies are ours again." He paused, his gaze never leaving the enemy's broken fleet. The next words rolled out like iron, a command and a promise all at once. "Now end this war." Inside the council chamber, screens burned with images of human warships cutting through the Empire's fleet when Chancellor Kaluuya returned. Columns of violet fire erupted in the void, entire formations of SAR ships collapsing in minutes. The chamber, usually a theater of arrogance and speeches, had fallen into something close to unease. Counselors shifted in their seats, their alien features betraying cracks in their composure. A violet-skinned Tharkan counselor, feathers shifting uneasily along his shoulders, gave a sharp flick of his wings. "Humans strike fast, but reckless fire leaves openings. That is what centuries of order teach us to avoid." His words carried superiority, but his voice was thin, strained at the edges. Another, a Luthari with gill frills tightening along his neck, let his claws tap against the table, rapid and uneven. "Yes, reckless and costly. They cannot sustain this. No, no one can." They spoke as if calm, but the truth was visible in their eyes. They weren't discussing strategy, they were hiding fear. At the center, High Counselor Syraxis himself leaned forward, his polished carapace gleaming under the chamber lights. He tried to form the words with the weight of authority, though his tone wavered. "Good. Good, Chancellor. Your people serve well. Now, leave the rest to us." Chancellor Wyatt Kaluuya stood with his arms folded, gaze fixed on the burning images above. He let the High Counselor's words hang in the air a moment longer than was comfortable, letting every alien in the room feel their own unease stretch. Then he answered, his voice calm but edged with something far sharper. "No, High Counselor. You put millions of civilians, humans and allies, in danger." The chamber stirred. Several counselors shifted as if slapped. Wyatt didn't raise his voice, didn't shout, but the weight of each word landed like stone. He moved toward the central console, the glow of tactical maps washing over his suit as his hand hovered above the controls. "Where is it again?" His tone was casual, almost mocking, but his eyes were locked on the star chart. His fingers swept through coordinates with practiced ease. The display zoomed across the sector until one cluster of energy signatures came into view. A ship so vast it dwarfed cities, jagged and radiant with violet energy, pulsed at the heart of the enemy lines. Wyatt tilted his head slightly, his voice cutting through the stunned chamber. "Ah, yes. There. The flagship of the Tsar Empire." His hand tapped the display, freezing the image for all to see. He turned toward Syraxis, and the chamber seemed to shrink under the weight of what came next. "Now, counselors, this war is ours. Just watch." The words carried like thunder. The counselors who once mocked now stared at him, their arrogance stripped away. They had seen soldiers before, battles before, but never this. Never humans deciding the end of a war in full view of the galaxy's most ancient rulers. Far from the chamber, above the battered colonies, the warhammers moved with relentless precision. Marines who had fought through streets and factories now pulled back toward the ships that had carried them into the fire. Dropships lifted from scorched ground, engines roaring as they punched back into orbit. Inside one landing bay, Hammer C-12 locked his gauntlet against another Marine's shoulder, dragging him forward. "On your feet, Hammer! No one's staying behind!" His tone was sharp, but carried the weight of care, not command. Hammer V-19, visor cracked and armor blackened, gave a grunt. "Still breathing, aren't I? Let's get back to the fight." The bay filled with armored figures, their presence heavy enough to make the metal decks tremble under their boots. Weapons clanged against armor. Squads checked each other's gear in silence, broken only by curt words. Hammer K-21 dropped into line, his voice carrying a hint of dry humor. "Feels like we just got here." Hammer R-34 answered with a grin audible even behind his helmet. "Yeah, guess they weren't ready for guests." Pods reattached, dropships sealed, and one by one, Marines streamed back into the veins of the colossal warships. As if pulled by the same unseen current, the Warhammer fleet reformed across the void. Hulls scorched, plating scarred, but every ship still moved with the same unified purpose. On the Sabbath's bridge, Admiral Donald Wayne stood tall, eyes locked on the shifting coordinates flooding across his displays. Reports came in fast, squads rearmed, weapons ready, every Marine accounted for. Lieutenant Rachel Kim turned from her station, voice steady. "All Warhammer units back on board. Fleet reports green across the board." Wayne gave a single nod. He didn't need to raise his voice. Everyone on that deck already knew the weight of the moment. "Then we don't wait. Set course for the heart of the Khazar Empire." Engines flared across the fleet, vast plumes of light cutting through the dark. Warships pivoted in unison, their prows turning toward the cluster of violet energy where the Khazar Empire's leader waited. The maneuver wasn't quiet, wasn't hidden. It was bold, almost taunting, a declaration made in steel and fire. On closed channels, brief voices carried the same resolve as the man who led them. "Targets marked. Let's finish this. They'll see us coming. Good. Let them. About time we knock on their door." The fleet stretched across the void, a wall of steel that moved like a single heartbeat. To the Council, watching from their chamber, it looked like madness. To the humans who filled those ships, it was clarity itself. The Warhammer fleet surged forward, engines roaring, hulls glowing under the light of distant suns. It wasn't retreat. It wasn't survival. It was the beginning of the end. And as the Council chamber's screens filled with the sight of humanity's entire strength turning toward the enemy's heart, Wyatt Kaluuya stood unmoving, his voice echoing once more in their ears. "Now, watch." The human fleet surged out of the jump into the black, and the scale of the battlefield hit like a physical blow. Where the Warhammers had rallied a few dozen warships and escorts, the Khazar Empire filled the void with hundreds, vast constructs of jagged crystal and alloy, strung together like shards of a shattered world refitted into armadas. The contrast was overwhelming. Humanity's fleet looked like sparks against a storm front. On the bridge of the Tsar flagship, a monstrous vessel the size of a floating city, the warlord Katarak sat enthroned upon a dais of fused bone and steel. His massive frame was draped in armor that pulsed faintly with the same violet energy that bled across his ship's hull. Around him, commanders laughed, their scaled jaws splitting wide as they watched the human formation appear. One of his lieutenants, a hulking Khazar with plated ridges along his back, leaned forward, amusement dripping from his tone. "Do they not see it? Children playing war. They bring pebbles to break a mountain." Another sneered, his claws clattering against the control rail. "Let them come closer. I want to watch their courage vanish when the first wave crushes them." Katarak rumbled with low laughter, his eyes burning like violet embers. "They dare. Good. Their end will be entertainment before the conquest." But as the laughter echoed across the chamber, the humans moved. The Warhammer fleet didn't form ranks. They didn't spread out to match the enemy's scale. Instead, they cut angles no strategist of the Empire had ever calculated. Assault vessels darted into narrow gaps between leviathans, their engines flaring white-hot as they pressed into the fractures of the massive formation. Instead of retreating from impossible odds, they closed in. On the Sabbath, Admiral Wayne's voice carried across the command deck, even and direct. "Drive through their spine, break them where they don't bend." The humans obeyed without hesitation. A pair of assault ships peeled off, cutting straight through a swarm of smaller Khazar craft. One ship lost stabilizers mid-dive, spinning violently. Its captain barked over the comm, "She's rolling! Control's dead!" Before disaster struck, another vessel banked hard, ramming the spiraling ship with its own hull to steady it. Hammer crews inside cheered as the ship stabilized just long enough to launch its pods. The sacrificial escort split apart in the collision, fire ripping through its frame, but it had given its brothers a fighting chance. Katarak's amusement faltered. His mandibles twitched, his voice turning sharp. They rammed their own to open paths. Madness. Yet madness was working. The smaller human ships, agile and reckless, created chaos inside the Empire's perfect grid. With every desperate maneuver, they cracked another seam. The massive Warhammer carriers followed, their armored hulls plowing through space like battering rams, shrugging off glancing fire to reach their targets. Then, the impossible began. Pods launched not only toward colonies, but directly at the Empire's warships. Some Marines hurled themselves out of their vessels as entire assault ships were thrown deliberately into collision courses. At the moment of impact, hatches blew open and Warhammers leapt into the void, armor propelling them across the short distance. They landed hard against the colossal hulls of Tsar dreadnoughts, magnetic clamps locking them in place. To the enemy, it looked like men had just parachuted into the skin of their titans. Inside one Warhammer pod, Hammer T-12 grunted as sparks burst from the wall. "Guidance is fried, pods blind." Hammer Q7's voice came tight and focused. "Kick it manual, angle left, we'll burn through together." The pod slammed against the side of a crystal giant, drilling through its jagged plating. Explosions gutted the corridor beyond as Marines stormed through, rifles blazing. The Tsar defenders, snarling with rage, rushed to meet them. Clawed fists slammed into shields, violet energy burning through the air, but the Warhammers advanced like living engines of iron, cutting down everything in their path. Another pod was struck mid-descent, its thrusters gutted by enemy fire. Hammer R-14 shouted, "Engine's gone! Brace!" The pod spun uncontrolled before smashing against the hull. Armor buckled, but the men inside forced their way out, crawling into the breach and firing wildly as smoke poured behind them. Hammer J-22 dragged one brother whose suit lock had frozen. "Move, Hammer. We're still in this fight." Within minutes, entire corridors of the Leviathan ships erupted into battlefields. Warhammers stormed reactor chambers, tearing through engineers and guards alike. They didn't just fight, they dismantled. Plasma charges were slammed onto conduits, explosives seeded into the guts of engines. Systems flickered, shields faltered, and alarms shrieked through vessels that had never known breach before. Back in the council chamber, the alien dignitaries leaned forward in horror, watching satellite feeds from distant eyes. One feathered counselor, usually smug, whispered hoarsely, "They are inside the ships." Another, eel-like and pale, tried to mask his unease with cynicism. "They cannot destroy titans with knives. It is reckless." But his frills trembled, betraying fear. High Counselor Syraxis's crystalline mandibles clicked in agitation, though his words strained for control. "They will burn with the ships they infest." Wyatt Kaluuya stood among them, calm in the storm. His eyes fixed on the feeds, a faint satisfaction flickering across his face. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The truth was being written in fire across the stars. On the flagship of the Empire, panic began to edge into the command voices. "Systems compromised on the Urath dreadnought." "The Veklar's engines are down," Katarak snarled, smashing his claw against the dais. "Seal them out! Cut the sections loose!" But it was already too late. Inside the Urath dreadnought, Hammer P6 set a charge on the reactor wall. His comm crackled. "Timer lit! We're gone!" "Move, Hammer," came the voice of Hammer L3, pulling him through collapsing beams. The two vaulted across a flaming corridor, diving through their own breach seconds before the core went critical. The explosion ripped outward, imploding the ship from the inside until nothing remained but shards of burning crystal drifting through space. Another Leviathan followed, then another. Each fell in minutes, undone not by massive barrages but by men who refused to stop moving. Marines who dragged each other out of fire, who made broken weapons into hammers and broken armor into shields. One Warhammer's thruster pack sputtered out as he tried to leap from a collapsing ship. He shouted, "I'm short! I'm not clearing it!" Hammer F-19 answered with grim calm, "I've got you!" He fired his own pack, colliding mid-air to slam the brother forward, sending him sailing into the open bay of a human assault ship. F-19 barely made it back himself, landing in sparks and fire, armor mangled but intact. Every human returned, every oath held. From orbit, the view turned nightmarish for the Tsar. Their Titans, vessels they had considered indestructible, now exploded one after another, fire blossoming across the battlefield. Wreckage floated like shattered monuments, and with each loss, the Empire's fleet faltered more. On the Sabbath's command deck, Wayne stood unmoving, his hands clasped tight behind him. He didn't need to speak. His men already knew. The impossible was happening. And in the council chamber, every counselor stared in frozen silence as the red icons of Tsar Leviathans winked out, replaced by nothing but void. The tide of the war had turned, and it was humanity's hand that broke the unbreakable. On the Tsar flagship, the battlefield was still burning when the order rang out across the comms. Warlord Katarak rose from his throne, claws carving furrows into the steel railing beside him. His voice, once booming with arrogance, cracked with desperation. "Signal the retreat. Every ship. Jump now." Around him, his crew scrambled across the command platform. One barked into a console, mandibles snapping in agitation. "Engines primed, Warlord. Preparing the sequence." Another hissed, scales rippling with panic. "The humans cut too deep. We must flee before the contagion spreads." The bridge trembled as another Leviathan exploded outside, light from the implosion washing through the viewing ports. Katarak's eyes flared. "Do it!" The commands went out. Core engines roared to life across the Empire's armada. Then, in a moment that split fear from certainty, they failed. Lights dimmed, warning glyphs flared, and every system stuttered into silence. Not a single ship jumped. "What is this?" Katarak roared, his spines rattling in fury. "Why do they not move?" A trembling officer clawed at his console. "The drives! They are dead, Warlord. Every last one. They cannot respond." The truth came too late. Deep in the belly of the flagship, dozens of shadows moved. Warhammers, armored giants in steel, stalked the corridors with weapons raised. Their boots rang heavy against alien plating, a rhythm that carried dread into every chamber they entered. Sparks lit the dark where their blades cut down Tsar guards who stood too long in their way. Hammer K9 muttered over the comm, his tone rough but steady. Engines gutted. No way they're leaving this fight. Hammer R8 answered, voice calm, almost grimly amused. Good. Let's pay them a visit. Door after door blew inward. Marines advanced without hesitation, cutting through resistance like a relentless tide. The Xar fought savagely, towering brutes with claws and plasma-edged blades. But the Warhammers pressed forward, never slowing. Every strike, every breach, every charge carried the weight of their oath. No one left behind, no one spared who stood against them. In one corridor, a Xar champion slammed his massive fist into a Marine, cracking his shoulder plate. The Warhammer staggered, sparks spitting from the breach. Hammer T3 stepped in, driving his blade through the alien's chest and hauling his brother back up. Still moving? The other grunted through his comm. Still fighting. They pressed on. The Warhammers carved their way to the command decks of ship after ship. Systems collapsed as reactors were gutted and power cores detonated. Reports flared across the human channels like thunder. General on the Arvath, gone. Second Dreadnought, burning from the inside. Command bridge of the Talrun, clear. Inside the flagship, Katarak felt the walls of his empire closing. The screams of his officers filled the chamber, each report another nail in the coffin of his reign. Then came the sound. The heavy, unbroken march of boots in the corridor outside. The doors shuddered. Light burst as explosives tore them from their hinges. Then he saw the Warhammers entering in a wall of steel. Katarak stood tall, towering over them, his voice rising with one last attempt at defiance. You think you can end me? I am the Empire. I am eternal. The Marines leveled their rifles, unflinching. Katarak's roar broke, shifting into something else as he saw their line advance step by step. His mandibles quivered, words spilling desperate now. Wait, stop. You want prisoners? Take me. I can give you worlds. Just let me. The sound of weapons charging drowned the rest. On the Sabbath, Admiral Wayne stood surrounded by his officers. One by one, the confirmations came through the comms, each voice distinct, each carrying a different weight. Bridge on the Velash, ours. Enemy commander on the Zural, executed. Third sector, every general accounted for. Then the last voice, steady and final. Emperor's ship, we're done here, Admiral. Wayne lowered his head for a moment, letting the words sink into the bones of the command deck. His voice, when it came, was not sharp, not cold. It carried the sound of a man granting rest to those who had earned it. Good. You all can go home now. Good job, everyone. The officers around him exhaled, tension breaking like a wave. Far away, in the council chamber, Wyatt Kaluuya stood as the final feeds came in. Monitors flared with images of collapsing dreadnoughts, enemy generals executed, and the flagship itself falling silent. He let the reports speak for themselves, then spoke over them with a voice that cut deeper than any blade. It's over. The words landed like judgment. Every counselor turned, some pale, some trembling, their arrogance stripped bare. Wyatt held their eyes for a moment longer, letting silence weigh heavier than any argument they had ever thrown at him. Then he turned his back on them, his steps echoing through the chamber as he walked toward the exit. The war was finished, and it was humanity who had ended it. Hey there, space human. If you want to stand shoulder to shoulder with us and give even more support to the channel, consider joining the membership. It's a small way to help, but it means a lot, and it keeps this universe alive. Just check the join button or the link in the description. Oh, and one last thing. I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.